There's a specific kind of silence that comes with deep winter in northern Michigan. It's heavy, suffocating, and absolute. For most people, the snow acts as a dampener, muffling the sounds of the highway and the suburbs. But for me, the silence is permanent. I lost 90% of my hearing when I was a teenager due to a severe fever, and over the years I've learned to navigate the world through vibration and sight. I live in a subdivision that sits right on the edge of civility. My backyard bleeds into a dense, sprawling forest preserve that eventually connects to the state wilderness. It's beautiful, but it's isolating. My husband, Mark, works offshore on oil rigs, meaning he's gone for 3 weeks at a time. It's just me and Tank. Tank is my lifeline. He's a 100-pound mix of Rottweiler and Husky. He has the sheer muscle mass and black and tan coloring of a Rottie, but the piercing blue eyes and insane stamina of a Husky. He is my ears. If a car pulls into the driveway, Tank's head perks up. If someone knocks, Tank barks. If something is wrong, Tank lets me know. It was a Tuesday in late January, the kind of day where the sky is a flat, bruised purple by 4 p.m. I decided to take Tank for his evening run on the trails behind our subdivision. It had snowed fresh powder the night before, about 6 inches, covering the dirty slush of the previous week. We entered the tree line near the end of the cul-de-sac. The air was biting, the temperature hovering in the single digits. I could feel the cold stinging my cheeks, a sharp contrast to the heat building under my scarf. Tank was in his element, pulling at the lead, his breath puffing out in rhythmic clouds that I could see dissipating over his shoulders. We were about a mile in, on a path usually frequented by cross-country skiers, but today it was empty. The isolation didn't bother me. I was used to the quiet. But then, Tank stopped. He didn't just slow down, he planted his feet. The leash went taut. I looked down at him. His hackles, the fur along his spine, were standing straight up. He wasn't looking at the path ahead. He was staring deep into a cluster of pines to our left. I followed his gaze. At first, I saw nothing but the monotonous pattern of gray trunks and white snow. Then, I saw the color. It was a jarring, unnatural blue. I took a step closer, tightening my grip on Tank's leash. Hidden behind a thicket of dead brush was a makeshift shelter. It wasn't a tent, it was a blue tarp strung haphazardly between 3 trees, weighed down with heavy logs. It looked frantic, temporary. Tank let out a low vibration against my leg, a growl I couldn't hear but could definitely feel. I scanned the ground near the shelter. That's when my stomach dropped. The snow was pristine everywhere else, but around that tarp it was trampled. Leading away from the structure, cutting across our path, were boot prints. They were massive. I wear a size 8 women's boot. I placed my foot near one of the prints for comparison. The stranger's print swallowed mine. It had to be a size 13 or 14, heavy tread, dragging slightly at the heel. These weren't the tracks of a casual hiker or a kid playing in the woods. These were heavy, purposeful steps, and they were fresh. The edges of the snow were still sharp, not yet softened by the wind. A sudden primal instinct screamed at me to leave. It wasn't a thought, it was a physical push. Get out, now. I tugged on Tank's leash. "Let's go, boy," I said, though I couldn't hear my own voice clearly. It felt muffled in my throat. We turned back toward the subdivision. I walked faster than usual, my head on a swivel. The woods, which usually felt like a sanctuary, now felt like a cage. Every shadow looked like a person. Every swaying branch looked like a reaching arm. We were about 200 yards from the exit of the trail, where the woods open up into the manicured backyards of my street, when I saw him. He was standing, perfectly still, leaning against a birch tree. If he hadn't moved his head, I would have walked right past him. He was wearing white and gray winter camouflage, pants and a heavy parka that blended terrifyingly well with the landscape. He was tall, looming, and his hood was pulled up. I froze. Tank lunged forward, the leash snapping tight, his mouth opening in what I knew was a ferocious bark. The man didn't flinch at the dog. He just stood there, maybe 30 feet away, staring at me. I couldn't see his eyes. He was wearing dark ski goggles. My heart was hammering against my ribs so hard I felt dizzy. I raised a hand, a shaky, awkward wave, trying to diffuse the tension. I assumed, or maybe prayed, that he was a hunter or a serious hiker. He didn't wave back. I saw his jaw move. He was speaking, or maybe shouting. I pointed to my ear and shook my head, mouthing, "I can't hear you." He took a step forward. Tank went berserk. I could feel the leash vibrating violently as the dog threw his entire weight toward the stranger. The man stopped. He tilted his head, looking at the dog, then back at me. It was a mechanical, predatory movement. He didn't look scared of the 100-pound beast straining to get at him. He looked calculating. I didn't wait to see what he would do next. I yanked Tank back and broke into a run. I didn't look back until I burst through the tree line and into my backyard. I scrambled through the back gate, slammed the latch shut, and practically fell through my patio door, locking the deadbolt with trembling fingers. Inside, the safety of my kitchen felt fragile. I stood by the glass door, peering out into the gathering dark. The woods were a black wall now. There was no one there, just the snow, the trees, and the fading light. I spent the rest of the evening checking locks, front door, side door, windows. I drew all the curtains. I texted Mark, telling him about the weird guy in the woods, trying to play it cool so he wouldn't worry from 1,000 miles away. "Just a creep," I typed. "Tank scared him off." But I couldn't shake the image of those massive boot prints, or the way he had stepped forward when I told him I was deaf. I fed Tank and checked the security panel. Everything was green. I took a sleeping pill to calm my nerves, a mistake in hindsight, and went to bed around 11 p.m. Tank usually sleeps on the rug beside my bed, but tonight I let him up on the mattress. I needed to feel him there. The sleep was heavy and dreamless, a black void induced by the medication. I don't know what time it was when the sensation woke me. It wasn't a sound, it was the mattress shaking. I opened my eyes, groggy and disoriented. The room was black pitch. Tank was standing on the bed, facing the bedroom door. His entire body was rigid. I reached out to touch his flank and felt a deep, continuous rumble. He was growling, a low, vicious growl that was shaking the bed frame. Then, the room exploded with light.
My bedroom window faces the backyard. I have a high-powered motion sensor floodlight installed above the back patio doors. When that light triggers, it cuts through the darkness like a flare. The light was reflecting off the snow outside, casting harsh, erratic shadows through the gaps in my blinds. Someone was in the backyard. I grabbed my phone from the nightstand. 3:17 a.m. Panic, cold and sharp, washed away the last of the sleeping pill's fog. I sat up, grabbing Tank's collar to keep him from bolting. I needed to know what was happening before I let him go. I slid out of bed, keeping low, and crept to the window. I peeked through the slat of the blinds. The backyard was illuminated in stark white light. The snow was churned up, and there, standing directly in front of the patio doors, was the figure. The same camouflage parka, the same hood. But he wasn't just standing there this time. He was close. His face was pressed against the glass of the sliding door downstairs. I couldn't see his face clearly from this angle, but I saw his hands. He was cupping them around his eyes, peering into my living room. He wasn't trying to hide. He was shopping. Then he pulled back. He reached into his deep pocket and pulled out something heavy. It looked like a crowbar or a tire iron. He raised it above his head. I didn't hear the glass break. That's the most terrifying part of my memory of that night. I saw the action, but my brain filled in the silence with a phantom crash. I saw his arm swing down violently. I saw the double-paned safety glass shatter, spiderwebbing instantly before collapsing inward in a cascade of glittering shards. He stepped through the frame, crunching over the glass, entering my home. Adrenaline dumped into my system. I turned to Tank. "Get him!" I screamed, though the sound was likely distorted by my terror. I released the collar. Tank didn't hesitate. He launched himself off the bed and flew out the bedroom door. I felt the floorboards vibrate as he thundered down the stairs. I didn't follow him. I ran to the closet. Mark keeps a machete on the top shelf, a souvenir from a trip to Costa Rica, but sharp enough to be dangerous. I grabbed the handle, the cold leather grounding me. I moved to the top of the landing, pressing my back against the wall, weapon raised. Below me, chaos. I couldn't hear the fight, but I could feel it. The floor shook. Lamps were being knocked over. I saw flashes of movement in the entryway below, the gray blur of the intruder and the black and tan fury of Tank. I saw the intruder swing the tire iron. He struck Tank in the shoulder. My dog, my brave boy, stumbled but didn't retreat. He lunged again, snapping at the man's forearm, clamping down on the thick parka. The man flailed, trying to shake the dog off. He slammed Tank against the wall. A picture frame fell, shattering. Then the man looked up. His ski goggles were gone. For a split second, our eyes locked across the staircase. His eyes were wide, bloodshot, and frantic. There was no humanity in them, just a raw, drug-fueled intensity. He saw me standing there with the machete. He saw that I wasn't cowering in a bedroom. He pulled back at the dog, who was preparing to lunge again, snarling with bloody saliva flying from his jowls. The intruder made a choice. He kicked Tank hard in the ribs. I felt the thud through the floor, and spun around. He scrambled back toward the broken patio door. Tank was on him instantly, nipping at his heels, tearing a chunk of the camouflage pants as the man dived through the shattered frame and back into the snow. I ran down the stairs, jumping over the broken glass, screaming. I didn't care if he could hear me. I wanted him to know I was coming. I reached the threshold of the broken door. The cold air hit me like a physical blow. Tank was at the edge of the patio, barking into the darkness, but he stopped at the property line, trained not to leave the yard without a command. The motion light was still on. I watched the gray figure sprint across the snow, stumbling, falling once, then scrambling up and vaulting over the back gate. He disappeared into the tree line. I collapsed onto the floor, the machete clattering onto the tiles. I grabbed Tank, checking him over. He was limping on his front right leg and had a cut on his snout, but he was alive. He licked my tears off my face, his body radiating heat and adrenaline. I called 911. The dispatch operator had trouble understanding me at first because I was sobbing and deaf, but I managed to scream "home invasion" and my address. The police arrived in under 10 minutes. I saw the blue and red lights flashing against the living room walls before I saw the cars. They swept the house. They swept the yard. 2 officers with canine units went into the woods, following the massive boot prints. They found the shelter I had seen earlier, the blue tarp. Inside the shelter, they found a sleeping bag, empty cans of food, and a pair of binoculars. But what chilled me to the bone was what they found tucked under the sleeping bag. It was a notebook. One of the officers showed it to me later, asking if I recognized the handwriting. I didn't, but I recognized the content. It was a log, dates and times. Jan 12, 0800, she leaves, the dog is with her. Jan 14, 1800, lights on in kitchen, alone. Jan 20, 0900, husband left with suitcase, taxi. He hadn't just been a random hiker I stumbled upon. He'd been watching the house for weeks. He knew Mark was gone. He knew my schedule. The only thing he hadn't counted on was the ferocity of Tank and the fact that I would be awake. The police lost his tracks about 2 miles deep in the forest, near a service road. They think he had a vehicle stashed there. They never caught him. I moved out of that house a month later. Mark quit the offshore job. We live in a condo now, on the 3rd floor in the middle of the city. There are no woods here. But sometimes, when I'm walking Tank in the city park and the snow begins to fall, dampening the vibration of the city, I get that feeling again, the feeling of eyes on my back. And I wonder if he's still out there, looking for another quiet house on the edge of another quiet wood, waiting for the lights to go out.
There's a saying that technology has made the world smaller. Usually people mean that in a good way, that we are more connected than ever. But after what happened to my sister Bree and me last October, I've realized that a smaller world just means there are fewer places to hide. I'm Sky. At the time, I was 16 and had just gotten my driver's license. My sister Bree was 15. We live in southern Illinois, a few hours south of Chicago, where the flat cornfields eventually give way to the rugged hills and dense woodlands of the Shawnee National Forest. Our dad is a forestry contractor. He spends his days deep in the woods, marking timber or checking soil erosion. It's a job that takes him into dead zones where cell service is a myth. We were used to him being unreachable until he got back to the main roads. It was a Saturday, around noon. Bree and I were lounging on the couch, scrolling through TikTok when my phone buzzed. "Hey kiddos, left my lunch on the counter. Starving. Can you run it out to me? Current site is past the old mill near Cedar Lake. Main road is closed. Meet me at the fishing pier. Bring Gatorade." It was from Dad. I looked at the kitchen counter. Sure enough, his insulated lunch bag was sitting there. He must have forgotten it in the rush this morning. "Road trip?" I asked Bree, dangling my keys. She shrugged, happy for any excuse to get out of the house. We grabbed the lunch bag, stopped at a gas station for Gatorade, and headed south. The drive was about 45 minutes. As we turned off the highway and onto the gravel service roads of the Shawnee National Forest, the bars on my phone signal began to drop. 4 bars, 2 bars, 1 bar, then no service. The trees here are ancient and thick. In the summer, they form a green tunnel that blocks out the sun. In October, they were skeletal, shedding brown leaves that swirled across the windshield. We navigated the winding roads, kicking up dust. I knew the spot he was talking about. It was a secluded inlet of Cedar Lake, a place popular with fishermen in the summer, but desolate in the fall. "It's weird he's working weekends," Bree muttered, looking out the window. "Overtime pay," I said, keeping my eyes on the ruts in the road. Besides, he probably just wants to finish this sector so he can take next week off for hunting season. We arrived at the trailhead around 1 p.m. The parking lot was just a patch of beaten dirt. There were no other trucks, no forestry vehicles, just the silence of the woods and the gray water of the lake visible through the trees. "I don't see his truck," Bree said. "He probably parked on the upper ridge and walked down," I reasoned. "He said meet at the pier." We grabbed the lunch bag and the drinks and walked down the narrow path toward the water. The lake was still as glass, reflecting the overcast sky. The wooden fishing pier extended about 50 feet out into the water. At the very end of the pier, a figure was sitting on a bench facing away from us. He was wearing a black Carhartt jacket and a beanie. Dad usually wore bright orange safety vests, but maybe he'd taken it off for lunch. "Dad," Bree called. The figure didn't turn. He just sat there, staring across the water. I felt a sudden, cold prickle on the back of my neck. It's hard to explain, but you know your own family. You know their posture, the way they hold their shoulders. Something about the way this person was sitting felt rigid, wrong. "Dad," I called, louder this time. We were about 20 feet away now. The wooden planks creaked under our boots. The man stood up slowly. He didn't turn around immediately. He stretched his arms as if waking from a nap. Then he turned. It wasn't Dad. It was a man I had never seen before. He looked to be in his 30s, with pale skin and dark circles under his eyes. His face was completely blank. No surprise, no anger, just a void. "You're not Dad," Bree whispered, grabbing my arm. The man didn't speak. He reached into the pocket of his black Carhartt jacket and pulled out Dad's phone. I recognized the rugged OtterBox case immediately. He held the phone up, waving it back and forth gently, like a pendulum. And then he smiled. It wasn't a friendly smile. It was wide, showing too many teeth, and it didn't reach his eyes. It was a look of pure predatory amusement. He had baited a trap, and we had walked right into it. "Run," I hissed.
We dropped the lunch bag and sprinted back up the path. I didn't look back to see if he was chasing us. I just heard the heavy thud of boots on wood, then the crunch of gravel. We reached my sedan in record time. I fumbled with the keys, my hands shaking so violently I dropped them once in the dirt. "Sky, hurry!" Bree screamed. I snatched the keys up, unlocked the door, and we threw ourselves inside. I jammed the key into the ignition and the engine roared to life. I slammed the gear shift into reverse. As I whipped the car around, the headlights swept across the parking area. The man wasn't chasing us. He wasn't running. He was kneeling behind my car, near the rear bumper. When the gravel crunched under my tires as I reversed, he jumped back, raising his hands in a mock surrender. He was still smiling that sick, toothy smile. I didn't wait to ask questions. I floored it. The tires spun, searching for traction before gripping the road. We tore out of the forest, driving way too fast for the gravel conditions, sliding around corners until we hit the pavement. Did he have a gun? A knife? Bree was hyperventilating in the passenger seat. "I don't know," I said, my voice trembling. "I don't know what that was." I checked the rearview mirror constantly for the next 10 miles. No one was following us. The road behind us was empty.
By the time we reached the main highway, my heart rate had finally slowed down to a manageable rhythm. The bars on my phone popped back up. LTE. "Call Mom," I told Bree. Mom was at work, a nurse at the local hospital. She picked up on the second ring. We told her everything. The text, the lake, the man with Dad's phone. "Go straight home," she ordered, her voice tight with panic. "I'm calling the police and I'm calling your father's dispatch to find out where he actually is." We drove home in silence. The safety of the suburbs usually felt suffocating to me, but today, seeing the rows of identical houses and the manicured lawns felt like a sanctuary. We pulled into the driveway, ran inside, and locked every single door. An hour later, Mom arrived. Shortly after that, a police cruiser pulled up. We gave our statements. Dad arrived home around 6 p.m. He was furious and terrified. He told us he had left his lunch at home, realized it around 10 a.m., and when he went to his truck to get his backup snack, his phone was gone from the center console. He assumed that it slid under the seat. He had been working in a totally different sector of the forest, miles away from Cedar Lake. "Someone must have stolen it out of the truck while I was calibrating the equipment," Dad said, pacing the living room. "They saw home or daughter in the contacts and decided to play a game. The police filed a report for the stolen phone in the incident, but they were honest with us. Without a license plate or a better description, and since he didn't physically harm you, there's not much we can do tonight. We'll patrol the lake area." We felt violated, but safe. The man was 40 miles away in the woods. He didn't know who we were. He just had a stolen phone. That night, the atmosphere in the house was heavy. Dad deactivated his phone remotely, turning it into a useless brick. We ordered pizza because no one felt like cooking, but nobody ate much. Around 9 p.m., my parents went upstairs to talk. Bree was in her room. I was downstairs in the living room watching TV with the volume low. The only light in the room was from the flickering screen of the television. My phone, sitting on the coffee table, chimed. I froze. It wasn't a text from a number I knew. It was an iMessage from an email address, a string of random letters and numbers. I picked it up, my thumb hovering over the screen. The message read, "I like how your house is lit only by the TV. It makes you look like a ghost." The air left my lungs. I slowly turned my head toward the large bay window behind the couch. The blinds were open. Outside, it was pitch black. I couldn't see anything but my own reflection in the glass and the darkness beyond. Then I heard it. A tap. 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 It was coming from the window. I screamed. I scrambled backward, falling over the coffee table as the bay window exploded inward. It wasn't a graceful shatter, it was a violent crash as a brick sailed through the glass, landing on the rug with a heavy thud. Shards of safety glass sprayed across the sofa where I had just been sitting. "Dad!" I screamed, scrambling up the stairs on my hands and knees. I heard the crunch of glass under heavy boots. He was inside. My dad met me at the top of the stairs, holding his hunting shotgun. He shoved me into the hallway and racked the slide. "Get in the bathroom with your sister. Lock the door." We tumbled into the bathroom where Bree was already crying, clutching her phone. We locked the door and huddled in the bathtub, the shower curtain pulled closed, listening. We heard Dad shouting, "Get
out! I have a weapon! Get out!" We heard heavy footsteps running, not towards the stairs, but away, back out the window, or out the back door. Then, silence. The police were there in 3 minutes. They swarmed the property. They found footprints in the flower bed outside the broken window. They found the back gate left wide open. But the man was gone. The police were baffled. "How did he find you?" the officer asked my dad in the kitchen later, while a text swept up the glass. "If he stole the phone and you wiped it, he couldn't track it here. Did he have your wallet, your ID?" "No," Dad said, "just the phone." I sat at the kitchen table shaking, wrapped in a blanket. My mind flashed back to the lake, the way the man had smiled, the way he had moved when we were leaving, the way he had knelt behind my car. "The car," I whispered. The officer looked at me. "What?" "At the lake," I said, my voice trembling. "When I was reversing, he didn't chase us. He crouched down by the rear tire. I thought he was just ducking." The officer exchanged a look with my dad. They ran out the front door to my sedan parked in the driveway. I watched from the doorway as the officer shone his flashlight into the wheel well of my back left tire. He reached in, grunted, and pulled something out. He walked back to us, holding a small, white, circular disc in his gloved hand. An Apple AirTag. The blood drained from my face. "He didn't need the phone to find you," the officer said grimly. "He tagged you at the lake. He's been tracking your location for the last 6 hours. He followed you right to your driveway." We stayed at a hotel that night. We moved houses 3 months later. They never caught him. The AirTag was registered to a burner email bought with cash at a Best Buy 3 towns over. The phone was found smashed in a ditch a few miles from our old house. I'm 20 now. I live in a dorm room on the 3rd floor. I don't go camping. I don't go hiking. And every single time I walk to my car, before I get in, I get down on my hands and knees and check the wheel wells, because I know how easy it is for a stranger to follow you home without ever taking a step.
There is a specific kind of darkness that you only find in the Colorado Rockies during a snowstorm. It's not just the absence of light, it's a physical weight. The snow acts like a curtain, swallowing your headlights and turning the world into a claustrophobic tunnel of swirling white. My name is Jess. At the time of this story, I was 24, living in Denver and driving back from a family dinner in a small mountain town about 2 hours west of the city. I was driving my old Hyundai, a car that was reliable enough in the city, but struggled with the steep grades and icy patches of the high country. It was just past 11 p.m. The forecast had called for light flurries, but in the mountains, light flurries can turn into a blizzard in the blink of an eye. By the time I hit the winding 2-lane highway that cuts through the national forest, the snow was coming down in heavy, wet sheets. Visibility was 0. I was crawling along at maybe 20 miles per hour, my knuckles white on the steering wheel, just praying to see the lights of a gas station or a plow. I took a curve a little too wide. I didn't even feel the skid at first. I just felt the steering wheel go light in my hands. Then the sickening slide. The car drifted diagonally across the empty oncoming lane and slammed into a dense snowbank on the shoulder. The impact wasn't violent enough to deploy the airbags, but it was hard enough to jolt my teeth and bury the front end of the Hyundai deep into the drift. A heavy thud followed as the passenger side clipped a pine tree. The engine sputtered and died. Silence rushed in instantly. I tried to restart the car. The engine turned over, whining, but the wheels just spun uselessly in the deep powder. I was stuck. I checked my phone. 1 bar of service. I called AAA immediately. The dispatcher sounded exhausted. She told me that due to the weather and the remote location, the nearest tow truck was at least 40 minutes out, probably longer. She told me to stay in the car, keep the hazard lights on, and wait. 40 minutes. I wrapped my coat tighter around myself. The heat from the engine was already fading, replaced by the biting mountain chill. Outside, the snow was relentless, piling up against the doors. I sat there for maybe 10 minutes, scrolling through my phone to distract myself, when I heard it. Crunch. It was faint, muffled by the wind, but it was distinct. It was the sound of something heavy compressing fresh snow. I froze, listening. Crunch, crunch, crunch. Footsteps. They were slow and rhythmic, and they were close. I peered out the driver's side window. The glass was frosted over, but I could make out the dark shapes of the tree line about 20 feet away. "Hello?" I called out, cracking the window just an inch. "Is someone there? I'm stuck." The footsteps stopped immediately. I waited. 5 seconds, 10 seconds, nothing but the wind howling through the pines. "Hello?" I yelled louder. No answer. A creeping unease began to settle in my stomach. If it was a Good Samaritan, why wouldn't they answer? If it was another driver, where was their car? I hadn't seen headlights pass me in 20 minutes. I convinced myself it was an animal. Elk and moose are common in these parts. They're heavy enough to make that sound. I grabbed the flashlight from my glove box and opened the door. The cold air hit me like a slap. I stepped out, sinking almost to my knees in the snow. I shined the beam towards the tree line where I had heard the noise. Nothing. Just the endless rows of pine trees standing like soldiers in the dark. The snow was falling so fast that any tracks were being filled in within minutes. "You're just paranoid, Jess," I whispered to myself. I got back into the car and locked the doors. I turned off the interior dome light to save the battery and to see outside better. I sat in the dark for another 5 minutes. My breathing had just started to slow down when a sudden, sharp noise made me jump out of my skin. Thwack! Something had hit the passenger side window, hard. It sounded like a rock or a chunk of ice. I whipped my head around, staring at the window. The glass held, but the sound had been aggressive, deliberate. Someone wasn't just walking out there. Someone was watching me. My heart was hammering against my ribs. The logical part of my brain tried to say it was a pine cone falling from the tree above, but the primal part knew better. That was a throw. I reached into the center console. I have a concealed carry permit, and I travel with a compact 9mm handgun for exactly this reason, though I always imagined I'd need it for a creep at a gas station, not a phantom in the woods. I racked the slide, checking the chamber. The weight of the cold steel gave me a shred of courage. I couldn't just sit there in a glass box waiting for the window to shatter. I needed to know what was out there. I turned the flashlight back on, took a deep breath, and opened the driver's door again. I stepped out, gun in my right hand, light in my left. "I am armed," I shouted into the wind. "Show yourself!" My voice was swallowed by the storm. I swept the beam of light around the car. That's when I saw them. Fresh tracks. They weren't elk tracks. They were boot prints. Large, heavy treads. And they didn't just come from the woods. They circled the entire car. Someone had walked a complete circle around my vehicle while I was sitting inside, terrified. The prints were disturbingly close to the doors, as if the person had been brushing against the metal. I followed the tracks with my light. They led away from the passenger side, trailing off towards a dense cluster of spruce trees about 30 yards away. I shouldn't have done it, but curiosity, or maybe shock, pulled me forward. I took a few steps, tracing the path of the boots. The tracks stopped at the base of a large tree. Lying in the snow, right where the tracks ended, was a dark object. I shined the light on it. It wasn't a rock. It was a wooden carving. I stepped closer, keeping the gun raised. It was a crude, hand-whittled figure, maybe 6 inches tall. It looked like a man, but the proportions were wrong. The arms were too long, reaching down to the knees. It was stained dark, almost looking like it had been burnt. It was resting upright in the snow, facing the direction of my car. It looked like a totem, a marker. A wave of nausea hit me. This wasn't a casual passerby. This was something else. I spun around, panic finally taking full control. I needed to get back to the car, lock the doors, and wait for the tow truck with the gun in my lap. I sprinted back through the snow. I reached the car and grabbed the handle of the driver's door. I froze. The door was already unlatched. I hadn't closed it fully when I ran out. Or maybe... I pulled the door open and aimed my flashlight at the driver's seat. I stopped breathing. My purse was on the floorboard of the passenger side where I had tossed it, but lying directly in the center of the driver's seat, where I had been sitting moments ago, was a small, neat stack of items. My driver's license, my credit card, a folded photo of my parents that I kept in the transparent slot of my wallet. They were stacked perfectly. The edges were aligned with obsessive precision. The intruder hadn't just circled the car. While I was 30 yards away looking at that wooden doll, someone had slipped into my car. They had opened my purse. They had gone through my wallet. They didn't take the money. They didn't take the cards. They just took the things that proved who I was, looked at them, and displayed them for me to find. It was a message. I can get to you. I know who you are. I was right here. I didn't get back in the car. The thought of being inside that metal trap, knowing he had been in there, knowing he was watching me discover his arrangement, broke me. I slammed the door and ran. I ran down the middle of the highway. I didn't care about the cold. I didn't care about the snow. I just ran until my lungs burned. I saw headlights coming around the bend about 10 minutes later. I waved my arms frantically, keeping the gun hidden in my pocket so I wouldn't get shot. It was my dad. I had called him right after AAA, and he had driven up from the other direction in his 4x4. I collapsed into his passenger seat, sobbing. I couldn't even speak. I just pointed back up the road. We drove back to my car. My dad had a tire iron, and I had my gun. We approached the vehicle cautiously. The snow was falling harder now. The footprints circling the car were already fading, turning into soft depressions in the white. We opened the driver's door. The seat was empty. My license, my credit card, the photo, they were gone. But on the gray fabric of the seat, there was a faint, wet stain. Mud. Someone had been watching me run away, and once I was gone, they had come back one last time to take their souvenirs. We managed to get the car out of the drift with my dad's truck, but I refused to drive it. I made him tow it. I never called the police. What would I tell them? That someone stacked my credit cards neatly? That I saw a wooden doll in the woods? By the time they would have arrived, the snow would have covered every single track. There was no evidence, no violence, just a violation so deep that I still check the back seat of my car every single time I get in, 7 years later. I moved out of Colorado the next spring. I prefer flat land now, places where you can see for miles, places where there are no trees for things to hide behind.